So welcome to Zoom Basics. This is a recording of a slideshow that we've provided as a live webinar, and now we're offering it to you as um, a recorded show. We're going to be covering the basics of Zoom. It's quick and dirty. A lot of the things that we're going to be describing or going over, you can also find in Zoom's tutorials. We're presenting this particular slideshow with the idea of using Zoom for adult education. So there's a nice video been put out by the members of Hamilton where they've made a song called Zoom is Where It Happens. I'm not going to play it for you now, but just know that it's there, and it's kind of a fun way to talk about Zoom maybe with your students. So the slideshow that goes along with this video, which will be available in the notes below the video, this slideshow can act like a toolkit. If you put it in present mode, all of these enumerated items here can be clicked on to take you to that section of the slideshow. So it acts a bit like a book, and this would be the index. We are going to be going through it basically in order of the icons at the bottom of your screen when you're in Zoom, and then some additional items at the end. And we know that many of you may be concerned. There have been a lot of headlines about security issues and other privacy concerns with Zoom. We still think Zoom is a really great resource for us in adult ed. There are some links later on. We'll talk a little bit about ZoomBombing and some other security concerns and how you can protect yourself, but we still think this is a good way to go. And I just wanted to point out this article that's talking about how the amount of users has skyrocketed from 10 million in December to 200 million daily users now. We've used a variety of other online tools for video conferencing, and we just find that most of them have not been able to maintain a sustained quality level. We've had some sound issues or some lag times, more with other tools like Skype. I've not used actually for a meeting, but we've used Google Hangouts. WebEx we don't think has all the resources or tools that we think Zoom does. So we still think Zoom's the way to go. But I'm sure all these tools are dealing with bandwidth and coming to terms with having huge numbers of users joining them on a daily basis now. So everyone is figuring this out. As time goes by, other tools may present themselves to be really trustworthy and reliable. But for now, we're going with Zoom. So welcome to Zoom. Zoom is an online meeting platform. I think the first time I ever experienced it, it was with someone who was marketing to me and could demonstrate their screen at the same time as talking, and we could have a conversation back and forth and see each other's faces. Since then, I think they've added a number of other tools that make it even more of a rich tool for having a class online. The fact that there's a free version, which again has some limitations to it, although I've heard that some of those limitations have been lifted as far as how long the meeting can be, which is technically 40 minutes, but I've heard some people tell me that that can be extended, and also the limit of how many people can be in a meeting. We're paying for a pro account, which means we can have 100 users or 100 participants and have unlimited length of meetings. You can choose, so we're paying on a monthly basis with the idea that we may not need it for a whole year, but if you think you're going to be using it for a whole year, it is a little less expensive. If you pay for 1 year in a go, your monthly rate will go down. So when you're accessing Zoom, it can be a little confusing. The first time you probably ever accessed Zoom, it might have been through a link that someone else shared with you to join them in the meeting that they were hosting. When you do that, you're usually prompted to, it goes to your browser, and then from there you're prompted to download Zoom software. Or if you open it up on your phone, it might have asked you to download the application, the phone app or the tablet app. So really there are three different ways that you access Zoom. One is a desktop application, which is what you downloaded, and it usually will make a shortcut on your desktop. You may need to search for it if it didn't do that. Then there's the browser version, which you get to by going to zoom.us or clicking on a link if someone's sharing a meeting link with you. And your browser, I use Chrome, so it's the way you get to the internet. And then there's the app, and the apps are a little bit different depending on the device you're using. I use an Android phone, so I have some screenshots in the slides from Android phone. They're similar, and I will say actually that the app is more similar to the desktop application as far as the icons they use and the layout. The browser version is the richest dashboard. It has the most settings. It can be a little overwhelming for that reason, but it is where you want to go to enable certain settings that are hard to find in the other two tools. So again, we have the desktop application, we have the browser version, and we have the app. The desktop application looks like this when I open it up. It's very simple. You have those four main icons: new meeting, join, schedule, share a meeting. And then at the top, you have the home, chat, meetings, and contacts tabs. If you have an upcoming meeting, it'll show on the right side in that little calendar box, and you can just click on it and go straight to the meeting. You can also click on meetings at the top, and that will show you a list of all your meetings, and you can click from there to open up a meeting or to invite people to a meeting. So these icons are very similar to what we'll see in an app, the app version as well. The browser version is a little confusing. If you go to zoom.us, you'll probably get to this screen. Even if you're logged in automatically, it doesn't really show you that here. You see that it doesn't show your image or indicate that you're logged in. And it also only shows you the options of joining a meeting and hosting a meeting. And for most of us, we're going to be scheduling meetings. So we want that option too. So to get to that option, you need to click on My Account. If you're not logged in at that point, it will prompt you to log in. If you are logged in, it will take you to a dashboard that does include now the option of scheduling a meeting up at the top, but it also takes you through all the different settings. So on the left side here, you see under Personal, and then under Admin. Under Personal, this is the profile view. You can upload a profile picture, which will actually show when you're disabling your video, which can be handy. You also see your information and your personal meeting ID. And a note here about personal meeting IDs, that number stays the same always. If you share it with someone, it's like sharing your phone number, but they now have, you know, the video access with you. So absolutely feel free to share that with people that you want to have that relationship with, but you may not want to use that with people who could share your link with other people. When you're creating an invitation or scheduling a meeting, you'll have the option of using your personal meeting ID or using one generated by Zoom, and we recommend using that one generally. If you have a relationship with your students where you are happy to have them have your cell phone number, you could consider giving them your personal meeting ID. But just know that that stays the same for always. So you're giving people access to you in a way that you need to be careful that you want to do it that way. If you go down those tabs on the left side under meetings, webinars, recordings, and settings, you'll get to the different settings for all those things. So as we go through some of these other tools, I'll mention that you need to go in here to enable them, and then you'll actually see them in the drop down or in the toolbar that shows up at the bottom of your screen when you're in Zoom. We are just using a regular pro account. We did not pay for the webinar version. Webinar version is a $40 fee on top of the monthly fee for the pro account. And it does include an ability to have people sign in, which I think is the most valuable thing we can think of with it. It also allows you to mute people on entry, but we found that we could do that in the pro account. So we haven't paid for the webinar account, but we are struggling with this issue of managing attendance. And so if that's a big concern for you, you have to decide, is it worth $40 a month to have that built in? All right, so on the Android app, as you can see, the icons are incredibly similar, the same actually, to what you saw on the desktop application. They're just laid out differently and on different apps for different devices. So iPhone could look a little different, a tablet version could look a little different, but they're basically using the same icons. So you have the new meeting, join, schedule, share meeting, and then at the bottom you have meet, chat, meetings, contacts, and settings. The join is if you have someone's given you a code, you can put that in there, or their meeting ID number. New meeting just starts a meeting right up, and once that happens, it's going, and you can click invite and invite someone in, or maybe you just want to record a video like I'm doing right now, which I'm doing without having an audience. So I have gone into a new meeting, but I've not invited anyone to join me, and I'm just recording it. These are some other views inside the phone app version. So here you can see a list of the meetings that I had scheduled, including their IDs, which are no longer useful. You can see they're all different because I'm not using my personal ID. And then under meeting settings, there are some settings here. They're not the full level of settings that you have when you go to the browser version, but you can control, for each meeting, you can change some settings here. One of the things when you're looking, so I'm going to be mostly talking about what you see when you're looking at this from a computer screen. If I'm accessing Zoom through my computer, again, I probably went through my browser or I had a link and I clicked on it and up came this screen with the, Zoom turned on. When you first turn Zoom on, you have the ability to change the view. So the view on the left is the gallery view, which is a little hard to see in the sense that there's only two people in it, and it looks like the top picture smaller, but actually these are equal size pictures. As you have more people join, there will be a grid that pops up that is all same size pictures. And the way that you know who's speaking is the yellow box around them. On the right side, we have what is called the speaker view. And in this view, the image of the speaker is bigger, and the small little pictures on the top are going to be where all the other participants are. When you share your screen, it automatically goes to the speaker view, and the shared screen is the central image with the little pictures on the top sometimes. Otherwise, it can just be a view of just your screen. You also can see down the side, depending on how you have it set up, you can, when you're in the full screen view of Zoom, you can have just the image of the speaker up at the top. You can have 3 or 4 people, or you can have no video showing. And that's just done by clicking on the little boxes. They're like little gray boxes up there. So again, we're using today the toolbar as our sort of organizing principle. If you scroll over the bottom of your screen when you're in Zoom, you'll see a toolbar that appears. On the left side, you have the mute and stop video. In the middle, you have security, manage participants. If you've turned on polls, polls will show up there, chat will be there, share screen is there, record is there. Breakout rooms, again, you have to enable that, and then reactions is also something you enable. So if they're not showing up, that means that they've not been turned on. And then all the way on the right is end the meeting. And if you're the host, that means that you're ending it for everybody, or you can move the host responsibilities to somebody else. The phone app Zoom toolbar looks a little different. You don't have all those things at the bottom, but most of the capabilities are somewhere around. So on my phone, I have a view where it's just the speaker. I have a view that is safe driving mode, which really disables the video camera, but also makes it very easy to mute and unmute. And then I have the main view, where I have the mute, stop video, share, participants, and more at the bottom of my screen. And I can record from there, I can disconnect audio, I can chat, and I have meeting settings, as well as the clapping hands and thumbs up. So you do have all these capabilities no matter how you're accessing it. It's just they're laid out differently depending. And this is important when you're working with students to know a little bit about how they are accessing the Zoom meeting. And if you're going to be doing some orienting about how to use different functions in the Zoom, you want to know how people are viewing the Zoom, because they're going to see their tools in different places. So we're going to start off with the first item after the mute and the video section with security. And security is a new setting that just showed up last week. So it may disappear again, but it basically hasn't made that you can access security settings while you're in a meeting much more easily than you could before. The security setting options are locking the meeting so no one else can come in. You can enable the waiting room, which is now a default. In the past, you had to put that on consciously. Now it's the default is to have a waiting room. You can enable participants to share their screen, to chat, or to rename themselves. These are all in response to the security issues that were happening where people were kind of invading other people's meetings. So they either were joining public meetings, but then taking over the screen share, or they were not invited to the meeting, but somehow got the link, or hacked into it and came in. These all are tools that allow you as the host to control for that. So locking the meeting means no one else can come in. Enable the waiting room. This means that everyone has to wait until you let them in individually. You can just let everyone in, but you also can go in and individually make sure that it's the people that you want to have come in. It's also a way to do attendance if you want to double check as you're letting them in. Allowing participants to share their screens. Again, if you are using that pedagogically, right, where you have a student who's going to show everybody something, you want to be able to give them that ability. Here it's not turned on because generally when I'm doing my presentations, I don't ask other participants to share their screens. And sharing the screen is what people have found as a way to do the Zoom bombing, which is basically bringing in either images or sounds that were not desired and often very offensive by taking over the share screen capability. The chat, this is a case of the chat is there. The way that you can manage the chat is, do you want people chatting amongst themselves or only to you as the host or to the whole group? I know some people have it set up just so that people who are participants can only talk to the host or to everyone and not to each other. Personally, in most of my sessions, I'm fine with people chatting amongst themselves. That's a decision you need to make. The issues I've heard, the reasons why people have disabled it is often because it can be confusing. If you start to chat individually with somebody or someone sends you an individual message, the chat will automatically set up as if you're going to respond to them individually, and you may have thought that you sent something to the whole group, but really you didn't, or vice versa. So there's some management in there, and if this is very new to people and there's already a lot of other causes for confusion and trouble, this might be one place where you could disable it to start with for a little while, and then after people become more accustomed, it's something else they can pay attention to. But it basically, that one to me is not so much a security issue as it's about you managing your classroom. The waiting room, once you enable the waiting room, what happens as people come in, you're alerted that someone is in the waiting room and you can admit them, or you can see the whole waiting room and admit people individually or as a group. This can be time consuming. You need to, it's hard to manage this if you're sharing your screen, for example. So if you've already moved into the session and someone comes late, this will pop up and it can be a little tricky to manage that. We really recommend having a co-host, even if the co-host is purely someone who can just push a button and let people in. And this could be another student. You know, I understand teachers don't often have the luxury of having a co-host who's another teacher, but having another student or having a student have that role, and maybe that's a role that moves around the class, so different people have that responsibility different days. And you manage what that role really consists of. So it's really letting people in if they come in the waiting room, paying attention to the chat. If you're sharing your screen, it can be hard to look at the chat. So having someone there who's just another person who can kind of jump in and say, hey, you're muted, or, you know, whatever it is not a bad way of planning your classes. And I actually think students would enjoy having that role, just like being the person who got, you know, having certain responsibilities in the classroom. So consider having a person with that assignment, and one of the things that you might want them to do is let people in from the waiting room. So moving on to the next item in our toolbar, it's managing participants. And this is an interesting icon in that I certainly as a participant may never have looked at it or clicked on it because I assumed, you know, why would I need to look at this? So they also see something here. You see manage participants, they just see participants. The participants screen that will open on the right, so you'll end up with a little bar on the right, which is also where the chat is and also where the announcement that there's someone in the waiting room. It all kind of happens in that gutter on the right side, again, when you're looking at a computer screen. So you'll see who the participants are, and as the host you can mute people from there. You can see if people have raised their hand there. You can unmute everybody, mute everybody, invite more people. You can add other things that people can respond to, that yes, no piece you can add in there. And again, you have some security settings in there. So you can lock the meeting from there. You can disable, I guess, the waiting room, or enable it. Allow participants to rename themselves. Renaming can be helpful if someone's calling in on a phone. Often it shows their phone number. and it can be helpful to know who that is. So helping people to do that might be good, but obviously in a security situation, people renaming themselves things that are not their actual names can be a concern. So you want to manage that. You can go in and rename someone if you also know who they are. When I've had some phone number people in, I've tried to do that so that we can see their names, not just their phone numbers. And from there, you can also invite. So if you noticed, in the bottom, so that on the right side there where you have the yes, no, go slower, go faster, more, clear all, there's the invite button. If you click on that invite button, it gives you the ability to invite people to a meeting that's already started. And you can either do it from whoever you have as contacts. I don't have a lot of contacts in my contact list. You can add, there have been some security concerns there where Zoom was set up to automatically add to your contacts everyone who had the same domain in their email address. And that worked kind of nicely for you if your coworkers and you could all be contacts. It didn't work so well when everyone had Gmail as their domain in their email. And so there were reports of people ending up with a lot of names, individuals listed in their contacts who were not actually contacts of theirs because their domain names were similar or the same. So I think they've disabled that. When I looked at this last week, all my coworkers were there, and now only Tilla is there, and she's someone I added. So the contacts you may not want to deal with at all, but if you're using it with students, that might not be bad. If you have all your students listed as contacts, then it's very easy for you to set up a meeting with them. Otherwise, you can either copy the URL or copy the invitation at the bottom of that screen, or you can go to the email tab, and the email tab will take you to this screen. Similar, the copy URL and copy invitation are at the bottom there, and they will just copy and keep it, and then you can paste it into an email from your actual email tool. Or you can click on one of these default emails here if you're connected to there. And basically it creates an email, and then you get to put in it, who you want to send it to, and then there can be a little bit of a lag. So if you're really waiting for someone to come on, just let them know that the email's on its way, and then they should be able to click on that link and join you directly in the meeting that's already going. Polling, as I mentioned, is one that you have to enable, and I've had 1 or 2 reports of people enabling polling and it still doesn't show up here or not consistently. I'm not sure what that is. I think that it will all work at some point. It's just technology doing its crazy thing. The polling is a great tool for short sort of surveying of people to capture, it could be a formative assessment, but only for a couple of questions. I think if you're doing more than a couple of questions, you might want to move to something like a Google form. But just to get a taste of the room and see if people kind of got the main point, you could definitely do a poll that way, or to gather data, just literally for the sake of, what are we going to do next, or which book should we read, or whatever. So when you click on polls, you'll get a screen where it'll give it the name of the poll. You might have multiple ones. You can name this poll something. You click on add question. You get to a screen where you put in the title of the question, the actual question, and then put in the possible answers. Once you're happy with your poll, you go here, you'll click on the save, and then you'll have a list of the poll questions, and you can launch the poll as you need to. Once you launch the poll, you'll see in live action people's responses coming in. Notice, though, that they are anonymous here, and I haven't checked to see if there's a setting somewhere where you can find out who actually answered what to the poll, which is another reason why, if you're using this as a real formative assessment for something more extended, and you want to actually know who is doing how well, you probably want to use something like Google Forms where people could actually enter their names. Also, there's a timing component to the poll, so you can set the time, how long the poll is open, and then it will automatically close, or you can manually close it by ending the poll. The chat. So the chat we find very, very valuable. Again, our experience is a little bit different than working with a set group of students over a period of time where you may want to have everyone just mute and unmute as they're talking with each other. In a lot of our webinars for professional development purposes, we are it's a little bit of a lecture situation, and so we often ask everyone to stay muted, but we use the chat as a place where people can interact with us. So they either answer questions that we pose, or They ask questions. They have, we've sometimes done attendance by having people, asking people to put their names and agencies in the chat. You can save the chat even if you're not recording the webinar. And if if you do record the webinar, then the chat is saved. The chat is a very useful tool. The challenge I've had with it is for example, because I'm sharing my screen, I've found it tricky to get back to see my chat without going back in and out. There's a side-by-side setting, and I haven't played with that enough yet to know if that would help with this situation. But in general, I think the chat's really, really valuable and a great way for people to interact. Again, there are definitely ways you can have the muting unmuting where, maybe people put in something in the chat and then you as the host can say, oh, Susan, I see that you mentioned that you're having a hard time with this item, this homework question or something like that. And why don't you unmute and let us know, tell us a little bit about it, or tell us a little bit more about what's going on. So you could use the chat as a way of managing the unmuting and muting process. And with muting and unmuting, there are some shortcuts. So you can hold the space. If you're in mute mode and you just want to be able to talk for a moment, you can actually hold down the space bar on your keyboard, and it will allow you to speak while the space bar is depressed. And then when you lift your finger off it, it'll put you back in mute mode. There are also keystrokes for that, but then there's also obviously the icon. But it's good to maybe tell your students that too. So the chat settings, as I said, you can set it up so that people can chat amongst themselves. You can allow participants to save the chat. The chat's an interesting situation in that there are some privacy issues there. Everyone's name is listed. As people share, maybe they're chatting amongst themselves, not directly to you. We have not seen that. As the host, I don't think that I see those individual chats. But you want to let people know because it's a privacy thing. Also, we've noticed in breakout rooms that the content that is shared in the chat before the breakout rooms are opened can be seen by everyone. But content that is added to the chat after the breakout rooms are happening, while they're happening, you only see the chat within each group. So if breakout room 1 is chatting, only the people in breakout room 1 see that chat. It doesn't go out to everybody. So that's both wonderful and terrible. You don't get overwhelmed by a bunch of different chats happening that are related to conversations you're not really hearing. But you also, as the host, cannot share information in the chat after people are in the breakout rooms and expect them all to see it. We'll talk more about breakout rooms, but the chat is an interesting tool for sure. And then saving the chat, once you have a chat going on the bottom right, you can actually save the chat there. So at any point you can save the chat even if you're not recording the whole meeting. If you're recording the meeting, like I said, the default is that the chat is saved as a separate file. Sharing documents in the chat, I've heard this is disabled. I see it still enabled on mine, but I haven't tried it since I heard it was disabled. So it might be that once I actually try to do it, I'll hit some problems. It is something you enable or disable in the settings, whether you can share documents, and the kinds of documents you can share are listed once you click on share file. The danger here for security purposes was that people were sharing files that maybe had malware in it or a link out to something that was not appropriate or not wanted. So you don't necessarily want participants to be able to share files, but maybe just the host can share files to the participants. Generally, I would not use this so much. I feel like the chat is such an ephemeral space. I would prefer to have all the documents or outside materials that I want folks to access. I would keep those either in a Google folder or a Padlet or a Weebly website or something where participants can get back to them by going to a single URL and seeing all their materials there and knowing which ones to go to. But I've seen people use this very effectively in sort of springing, we're doing something and here, I'm going to give you this new piece of information while we're in the session. And then you could have the Padlet or the Google folder be the backup for that, so students could get back to the content after the Zoom is over. I'm just not, I don't know that you could work with your participants so that if you shared a document here, that they knew what to do with that document after the fact, or does it just disappear when the Zoom is over and no one thought to save it or whatever. So those are my concerns around sharing documents this way. So in our regular session, this will be an opportunity for you to go now and chat in the Zoom chat. And we use this often also as an attendance tool. As I mentioned, this is a way to kind of, document everybody who is in the chat. The share screen button. So sharing the screen is really valuable when you're trying to demonstrate something. So either, I have the video of just me, and in the normal view, you would just have lots of us, all the videos of all of the people, all the participants, or at least little images of all the participants. Sharing the screen means I can show you something. I can show you my desktop, I can show you my browser, I can show you a specific document, I can actually show you just a piece of the document. I also, this is another place where you can do settings. So the little upward arrow beside the share screen is a place where you get to a few more settings. These are some of the same settings we saw in the security setting area. How people can share their screens, if you want other people to be able to do that. So this is what I was talking about. These are the different options I have. So I could share my screen, which in this case was a Zoom meeting, or I can share a whiteboard, which is a white space where we can either write or type kind of live. I can also screencast my iPhone or iPad here. And I can also go out to specifically to my browser. And depending on which thing you pick, you're going to get different tools to go along with it. So going to my browser screen, I got different functionality than going to the Zoom screen. The whiteboard, we'll see you get a nice toolbar of all the different ways to annotate the whiteboard. Some concerns about the whiteboard are that even though you can turn in the settings, you can turn on or off whether participants can annotate the board. It seems that often when people first start sharing their whiteboard, it is open and people can do things, and they often very beautifully draw hearts or whatever, but it's been hard to control. And I don't have a solution for that. I think over time students will be less excited about doing that. I also think if you make sure you have that setting turned on, that people cannot annotate on the board. You may also, I've seen both science, math, ESL teachers who have used the whiteboard really effectively. It could be that there might be another tool, even Padlet or something like that could do the job, and then don't have to deal with these particular settings that seem a little bit not so discreet. So you may struggle with it a bit, but it is really useful. It is a very useful tool to have a space where you can, do math notation and things like that you can't do so easily with a regular, Word document or something like that. So what you see here is the toolbar across the top, and then in the lower part of the screen is what the settings look like in your browser. So again, annotation, allow participants to use annotation tools to add information to shared screens. I have this unchecked, so I would want to test it out with someone and see if if I invite someone to my meeting, can they still go in and make marks on my whiteboard? And then there's whether you want to save it or share their whiteboards, which again, for educational purposes might be really useful. On my phone, I have the share option as well, and I have a lot of different documents I can share from there. Obviously, they're from the phone, but that means that students who might be accessing this from their phone could actually share documents quite richly with you, or share their screens of various types. Once you're in the screen sharing mode, your toolbar actually moves usually to the top of your screen. I think you can also have it on the right side. And when you look at that, as you scroll over it, you should get the full toolbar. Often it's slightly small, and so you have those 3 dots that indicate more. And under more, you have, again, you can see some of the keystrokes here. You have a number of things that you can manage. So you usually have all the functions you could do when you're not sharing your screen. They're just laid out differently, and I still find it tricky. So that's something definitely to practice. Otherwise, you just stop sharing by clicking the red stop share button. You're back in your usual Zoom space where you're seeing everyone's images, and then you can get back to the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. So recording is a wonderful tool. When you are going to record your Zoom meeting or some part of your Zoom meeting, you click on record and you're asked whether you want to record it to your computer or to the cloud. The difference between these two things, right, is one that the recording is going directly to your computer. It's not going to the cloud. It exists as a file on your computer. The record to the cloud version means it's being saved to your Zoom cloud, which you automatically got as part of your Zoom account. The tricky part about recording to the cloud is that you only have 1 gig of memory. So you'll fill that up pretty quickly. The benefit of recording to the cloud is that obviously you didn't have to save it to your computer. Maybe you have a lack of memory on your computer. And it also means that it's automatically on the internet, and I can just, Zoom will send you, actually, once it's rendered properly, they'll send you an email with the link to the video that you can share immediately to your students, so they can actually come back and see the video that you recorded. If you save it to the cloud, you can download it at any point and then delete it from the cloud to give yourself some more space. So maybe you could put it in the cloud, you save it to the cloud originally, and then after a period of time, you take it off and people don't have the same link access. You could save it as a file to your Google Drive and give people access that way, or you could upload it, download it again from the cloud and then upload it into YouTube or Vimeo or some other tool for video watching. If you record it to the computer from the very beginning, you also can do that, right? So you're saving it to your folder, you're saving it to your computer, and then you can put it into a virtual space like Google Drive, or you could upload it to YouTube or somewhere else. Just be aware of time limits. In order to be able to upload a longer video to YouTube, I think you have to have a verified account, which takes a little bit of work. Maybe you've already done that. If you put it into your drive, it will take up some memory, not too much, and people could access it from there. You can give them a link to that. It can mean that there would be less. So some people, it means that people who have access to the internet intermittently could download it from the Google Drive onto their computer, and then they could watch it at their own when they have time. So again, the choice between deciding to put it on to record to the cloud or the computer has more to do, in my mind, with whether you have a plan for where you're going to put it after a period of time, or how other people are going to access it. And then the caveat to that is that you will run out of memory pretty quickly in your cloud. So whatever you're going to do, if you're going to make lots of recordings, you're going to have to at some point delete things from the cloud and download them or do something else. The recording settings. So when you go to the browser version, again, you get all of these settings, and there are a lot of them. I think these are probably the default. And it is something to think about with the cloud recordings, because it's going to show different things on the screen depending on what you have selected here. Breakout rooms. So we mentioned breakout rooms. We think that people, this has been a very, very useful tool and doesn't seem to be available in a lot of the other online conferencing tools. This allows you to create as many rooms as you want, and you can either randomly assign people to those rooms, or you can assign people to those rooms. So you could create groups in advance, or recreate groups that consistently have met with each other before. You can have them spend time in the breakout rooms, as long as you want, and then bring them back to the big group. So you need to enable this first to even see it in your toolbar. You have to go to your browser setting version, go to zoom.us, and then go to your settings. This is in the advanced. So you can see on the left side, there's a little menu of sections to these settings. The in meetings basic is lit up there, but actually we've just passed that. So it's in meetings advanced. And that's how you turn on breakout rooms. You can visit each breakout room, so don't assign yourself to a breakout room, but instead go back. You can go around and join and then go back to the regular meeting. You can decide if people should be able to return to the meeting, the main meeting, if they leave their small groups, or you can have that disabled, so people have to leave the whole meeting. There are pros and cons to that. I'm going to let you think about whether that's a benefit or not. And you can have it automatically set to close after a certain amount of time, or you can manually decide that the meeting is over. When I do that now, I know I'm going to give people 60 seconds. They're going to get a little clock or a little thing that indicates to them they got 60 seconds. It's really kind of a, unless you really know that you've given them enough time to cover all the things they were supposed to do in their groups, this sort of pulling people back from their breakout rooms can be very not disruptive, but it can, they might be in the middle of a thought. So it's good to give them a little bit of a warning that they're going to be pulled back into the big group. So the 60-second timer is not a bad plan at all. This is how you set up how many rooms you want. Do you want it automatically? As Zoom will, you have 6 people and you have 2 rooms, they'll put 3 people in each room. Or if you do it manually, you can put 2 people in one room and 4 in another, and it'll give you a list of all the participants, and you can get to assign them to whichever room you want to. You might want to remind people to remember what their room number is. I always forget when I'm put in a breakout room. I never remember what breakout room I was in. And sometimes you want to use that as an organizing tool when you come back out. So have them remember that. You also have the possibility of sending a broadcast out to the rooms. This is instead, because the chat is sort of no longer a way to reach everybody at the same time. The downside of the broadcast is it's very small writing. It pops up around the top of the screen and it's fleeting. It shows up and then it disappears. And I especially people who've not used Zoom before or not been in breakout rooms before are not looking for that. So you either first of all, you want to remind people that you will be sending broadcasts. You want to wait for a little while so they've kind of gotten settled into their room and then send a broadcast. But it isn't very intuitive in the sense that it's just small and fast and everyone's doing so many things at the beginning of, once you join a room, you have to unmute yourself. And so there's a lot of kerfuffles going on. Yeah, and that's what it looks like. All breakout rooms will close in 50 seconds. The countdown will continue down to 0, and then everyone will just pop up into your main meeting. This is what I'm saying about, do you want to leave the breakout room? If you leave, you cannot return to the main meeting. That I know some people use as a way to keep people in their breakout rooms and not leave early. I was in a meeting like that. I didn't want to be in that breakout room anymore, and I just left the meeting, and then I had to come back to the meeting. And luckily I knew where my link was to come back to the meeting. So you want to manage this. You can tell people what the expectations are from the very beginning. I would tend to let people to come out of their breakout rooms, and I can always send them back if they seem to be goofing off. But anyway, you get to decide. This is very much a personality, teacher personality, classroom management thing, I think. So again, random or planned groups. Chat will not show any content added during the breakout sessions. So you want to make sure you've given all the expectations or the directions or questions or whatever, put that in the chat before you put people in the breakout room. That way they will all see it. If you do it after they're in the breakout room, they will not necessarily all see the information. Host can set a timer to automatically end breakouts and also pull all participants back to the large group. And a host can broadcast to breakout groups, but the broadcast is small writing and it disappears. In the breakout room settings, as I mentioned, this is that piece about allowing people to return to the main session at any time, that bottom right piece there. Yeah, these are all the settings again in the advanced. Reactions. So again, this is something you have to enable in the basic settings in your browser version. It's handy, especially if you're using it with groups of people who can't necessarily, for whatever reason, you don't want them muting and unmuting. It's just a nice way to kind of give some acknowledgement of information being received. So you get a thumbs up and a clapping hands. We use that a lot as a way to just kind of get a sense of the room. That it's even easier to see than if people are raising their hands in the participant list. So this pops up and then it just disappears. So again, enable that in your settings and then people will see it in their toolbar. So now we're out of the main toolbar. There are some kind of fun little bits and pieces that you may have heard about or seen people doing. One of the things that people are playing with is the virtual background. And the virtual background is useful in that it can take away the distraction of whatever your background actually looks like. If there are people walking around behind you, they'll be made relatively invisible by this, depending on how sensitive your processor is. They give you a few stock images and then you can put up your own, and that could be part of the lesson, right? That you're talking about an author and there's a picture of the author behind you. Or maybe that's an image behind you that you want everyone to discuss. It's also very individual. Some people really love that kind of stuff and other people don't care at all. But in order to use it, again, you have to enable it in your regular settings in your browser. And then once you've done that, you will see it both on your regular toolbar, that little upward facing arrow next to stop video or video on the left side of your toolbar. You'll see choose virtual background as an option there. Or if you're looking at the desktop application, you have, when you go to settings, which is a little gear underneath your face, and you'll see all of these settings down the side, and virtual backgrounds is the 6th. You'll have a set of pictures you can pick from, and if you want to add your own, you click the little plus sign and you upload a file. You want it to be high resolution because it gets very pixelated very easily. Virtual backgrounds do require that you have a certain processor size, otherwise it won't work at all, or it may work, but your face may take up some of the background image, or your eyes might. So for some people this doesn't work, and you need to test it out to see if it works well for you or what images work well for you. But it can be, I personally love this kind of thing and have enjoyed it a lot. Passwords. So the new security settings are that passwords are required. In your settings in the browser, you can say whether so first of all, the default now is that a password is required. You can have the password embedded in the link, which is what I've done, which means that people don't really need the password, but they are getting a very specific link with a password embedded in it. Again, decide what you want, but just know that if you're requiring a password, make sure people see the password in the invite and can get back to that if they forgot it when they're actually logging into your Zoom. And then inviting people to your meeting, it's not hard, but it isn't always so obvious. So this is from the desktop application. When you're setting up or scheduling your meeting, about halfway down the page, you have calendar settings. And then when you hit schedule, it's going to pop up an invite using whatever calendar you've chosen, and that you can either forward out or copy and paste from. If you're doing it via your web browser, you're scheduling your meeting, and again, about halfway down, there's an invite attendees, and they'll give you the URL there. But you can also copy the invitation, which just gives you a little bit more information, including a call-in number in case someone's calling in for the audio part of it. And then on your phone, either when you're either going to start a meeting and you can invite from there, or in this case, you're going to have a list of your meetings and send the invite, will pop up the information that you need to share. And you could text it to someone if you know that they're using their phone. So again, think about the way that your students are going to be accessing the Zoom and send them an invitation that they can access on that device. Email often is very useful because most people can access that across their devices. But if you know they're doing it via their phone only, you may want to use a texting tool, either Remind or just text them. And then personal meeting ID, I mentioned that it is the same forever. There's a default of using it as your when you're scheduling meetings, and you really don't want to have that be your default. It's better. But if you're using it with students and you know your students are going to struggle, you may want to use your personal meeting ID so it's always the same, or you could set up recurring meetings. Recurring meetings allow you to say how many, so this is when you're scheduling it, just like if you're making an appointment in your calendar, you can make this event a recurring event. So every Tuesday at 1 o'clock for 10 weeks, we're going to meet. And that way the link will stay the same for those 10 meetings. If you're meeting every day for 10 weeks, you could do it that way too. So that's one way to create a single link that will stay the same, but it's not your personal ID, and it's the same for that series of dates. And in the invitation, it will show you all the dates, and there'll be a single link, and people can put that wherever they need to remember that that's the link they need to come and join you. And then at the end of your meeting, you end the meeting. If you are the host, you can end the meeting for all, or you can leave the meeting. If you're not the host, you just leave the meeting. If you are the host and you want to leave the meeting, it's gonna prompt you to make someone else the host so that they will have that responsibility. If you create a co-host, they also can end the meeting. Here are some tips on looking good on Zoom. Again, there's no judgments here. We are all living in the world we're living in, but just as a teacher might, after you feel a bit more comfortable being a teacher, you might want to pay attention to how your room looks, or how you look, or the interactions you have in class. Just giving some tips on how to look good on Zoom is not a bad thing, right? So this woman is a reporter for MSNBC, and she talks a little bit about setting it for Skype, which is the same thing. Again, where is the camera? How's the lighting? Be aware of what's around you. It's not to say that it's bad. In her video, she kind of shows you how she's in her bedroom, and she shows you how the bed's behind her, and then she moves so the bed isn't behind her. Again, not a judgment on whether you have the bed behind you or not, but just know that there are ways to set it up. I've seen a lot of people who have the camera set up so it's coming up their nose. I've seen a lot of people with weird lighting where they actually are almost in profile silhouette against a window. Fine if those are choices, but just know that there are ways to really control for that. And those skills are important. I mean, this is, a day and age where we're all making little videos and things. So thinking about how you make a pleasant to watch video is a good thing to think about. There is a setting in your settings called Touch Up My Appearance, which sort of smooths out the texture of your skin. Very, very mild. I don't know. Just know it's there. Wearing dark clothes, I only suggest that because white can be very dazzling depending on your lighting, but you just check that out. You'll have a sense of that, but just know that, again, something to consider. Lighting is really important. I do a lot of webinars during the day. I have really nice daylight coming in, but at night I use an overhead light, and it changes everything. It makes my image very hazy, and that's something to think about, that lighting will impact the quality of your image. Position of the camera is key. And again, some people can't do anything about it, but others can make a conscious effort to put it in a place that's a little bit more attractive. Zoom bombing, so there's several articles about what Zoom bombing is and other security issues that have come up. We've really already talked about all these things, and really as we speak, Zoom is putting a lot of security settings in. The downside of all of this is that one of the reasons Zoom was so popular is that it's so easy to use, and some of the things that they're putting in to make it more secure are going to reverse that a little bit. So things that we really liked about it, some of those things have changed or been disabled. That is the challenge for them, right? That's why they became such a target, partially the number of people using it, and because it's so easy to use, Zoom became a target for people who wanted to mess things up for others. So they are going to make it a little bit more difficult to do that. It's going to make it a little bit more difficult for you to use some of the tools that originally were so useful. ZoomHacks, I'm really just pointing out that people are figuring out new things to do with Zoom all the time. This is an example of a diagram of how to make a document camera. A document camera allows me to show what I'm doing with my hands, or handwritten thing. We were talking earlier about like mathematical notation. This person did it with 2 soup cans on their phone, and then they're still doing the Zoom on their computer, and they have coffee. And that's really it for this session. I do talk a little bit about synchronous and asynchronous learning. I think that can be a valuable way to think about using Zoom, whether you want to be using it where we're all watching a video together, or is the video something that people do asynchronously off screen on their own time, and then we all come back together at 2 o'clock on Tuesday and discuss it. So consider how you want to use Zoom. I'm using it right now in an asynchronous way. I'm making this recording, but if I had a meeting with people live, that would be synchronous. And we talked a little bit about Padlet, Google Applied Digital Skills. These are content tools for you to think about as far as things that can support learning and that you report back to each other when you're using Zoom, but these are really more about content outside of Zoom. There's some resources here. So again, you'll have a link to this slideshow, and this is the contact information for us. Again, we're from the Literacy Assistance Center in New York City, and we are here to help in any way we can to provide you some support in this time of moving online with our teaching. So with that, I say thank you very much. And see you in real life sometime.